Welcome back to People You Want to Know. Today, I'm introducing you to another fantastic writer, comedian, and friend, Val Bodurtha. Val is a New York City-based comedian whose writing has been featured by McSweeney's, the AV Club, Forbes, Vulture, Buzzfeed, and more. Her most recent screenplay won the Atlanta Film Festival and placed top 10 at Francis Ford Coppola's American Zoetrope Screenplay Contest. I had to not only Google how to pronounce Coppola, but also Zoetrope. So that's a detail I wanted to share. Anyway, Val also does stand-up, of course, producing her own line of shows and opening for Jared Carmichael while undergrad at UChicago. Val's most recent film is the short mockumentary Wax Paul Now, featuring Paul Giamatti. It was accepted to the Miami Film Festival and AFI Fest, an Oscar-qualifying film festival. I've known Val since 2019 and have been amazed with her ever since. This episode is a little different from others because you will be able to sense that I'm very much interviewing a friend. Val and I shoot the shit in this episode and have a great time. We discuss Val's observant Jewish upbringing and how it led to her passion for writing and comedy. And we also discuss what the comedy scene is like. It's something that I love to talk about with comics when I bring someone on. Val produces and performs in a show of bomb shelter comedy in New York City. So for my New York City friends, I highly recommend you check her show out. All the details are in the description of the episode. Anyway, enjoy this episode. Hey Val, it's so great to have you on People You Want to Know. Thanks so much for coming on. Let's get right to it. Tell us about yourself. What do you do and how'd you get there?
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I am a stand-up and writer. So I live in New York. I produce weekly comedy shows. And I also write scripts for TV and film, as well as humor pieces. And when you write comedy, you get tapped in for a bunch of other projects as well. So if you name it, I do it, if it's in the comedy space. And yeah, I'm really excited to be on the show.
Awesome. And is it fair to consider you a Jewish comic or no? Because I don't think you're a comic that's also Jewish. Like, that's how I would describe you. Is that fair?
I would say I'm a comic who happens to be Jewish. I definitely have a few jokes about being Jewish. I don't hide it by any means. And the fact that my name is Val Bodurtha, I think throws people off, that I don't have a very Jewish name, but I was raised fairly religiously. So I try to sort of address that on stage right off the bat. I also think that, if you get to know me a little bit, it's pretty clear that I am Jewish. So speaking from any of my jokes, you could probably infer it, but I do also talk specifically about it and the experience on stage.
What's interesting is that you actually grew up attending Orthodox Jewish day school and come from a somewhat religious family. How do you think it impacted your comedy sets and your writing? How has it shaped you to who you are today?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think it definitely has influenced my approach to comedy. I think we had exposure to comedy from a very young age. It's part of the culture to sort of make jokes about things and to turn tragedies and traumas into comedy. So it was definitely welcome in my family for sure. And we would grow up watching, Mel Brooks and whatever. And if that's Jewish culture or just culture, that's not for me to decide. But I definitely think growing up as religious as I did also gave me unintentionally a sense of irreverence and a need to question absolutely everything. So it had one effect where it was explicitly supportive of what I was doing, and another effect that maybe wouldn't have been so looked upon as kindly by my rabbis. But now that I'm on the other side, I do love being Jewish. I do love the culture. So I appreciate the effect that it's had overall.
Can you delve a little bit more as to what you mean by irreverence?
Yeah, I think, to be Jewish is to question things, is to negotiate, even back to the early days of Abraham negotiating with God over Sodom and Gomorrah, right? He was like, can you get it down to 10 holy men? So I think it's funny because it's kind of counterintuitive that it is in us to pick apart and negotiate and be lawyers essentially. But then growing up in the Orthodox Jewish day school that I went to, it felt like there were also these very strict lines around what you could and couldn't question, which I found very internally contradictory. So I definitely wanted to dig into sort of the big questions, like, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why do we pray? Why can men lead davening prayers and women not? And when I didn't really get the answers to many of my questions, I started to sort of doubt the whole picture. And, I'm grateful for that critical thinking mini education that I received. And I think it was definitely supplemented by the high school education I received that was secular, and my college education for sure, as well as just surrounding myself with friends who felt the way I did about this stuff, most of whom are Reform Jews. So, it's interesting. It's like in one way, Judaism supports questioning, but if you get a little bit too far into it, it doesn't. And so my favorite thing, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's script writing or stand-up, is to subvert. So a lot of my scripts fall into the category of genre parody. I just think it's so awesome that we have these like established genres like horror and zombie movies and cult documentaries or whatever we're doing, rom-coms even, where everybody understands the cultural touch points. And there's so much opportunity to subvert those and to play with people's expectations. So I guess to surprise people is my favorite thing, because I felt like it was so pivotal in my upbringing and sort of my finding my personhood. That sounds very grandiose, especially because I'm talking about dick jokes, but there's maybe something there.
It sounds like you had like an Ari Shaffir experience. Ari Shaffir is this like straight Orthodox chicken on Yom Kippur swinging around comic, and he completely stepped away from it and went and became a secular Jew. And he has a YouTube special called Jew. That's really good.
I will definitely check it out. It's on YouTube, you said?
Yeah, completely free.
Oh, I like that. But yeah, to address something earlier, I do know a lot of Orthodox Jewish comics. I don't think it's like totally out of bounds to do that. I have plenty of family even who are comedians who are still deeply religious people. So I think comedy can mean something different to everyone. To me, it means to subvert. To them, it probably means something slightly different. But so I feel like I've felt a lot of support from my family in particular. Maybe it's because I am doing dick jokes and I'm not trying to disprove the existence of God or anything like that. So I guess it's like I'm doing an action that they maybe disapprove in certain contexts, but in my context, it's been ultimately a very positive experience interacting with them.
Yeah, and something that I associate you with, and feel free to talk more about these projects because I don't know if I'll do them justice, but I really associate you with satire for some reason. The Wax Paul Now movie that you did and some of the headlines that you write, they're always very satirical. And I think that's super Jewish.
Absolutely. I would say Judaism and satire are inextricably linked for sure. I'm not so into the sort of Onion style, like headline parody stuff, though I do love that comedy as well. I think I'm really more into the sort of, well, why do we tell this story in this way? So like one of my most recent projects is a zombie pilot where, I don't know if you like zombie movies, Margarita.
I don't think I've ever seen one, but I will watch this one.
Well, I'm a big fan of zombie movies, and it was always so interesting to me that two of the hugest zombie properties, Walking Dead and 28 Days Later, open with a guy waking up from a coma alone in a hospital to sort of a ravaged world. So I was like, okay, what are we missing in that interim period? Like, why do we always associate zombies with the fall of civilization? We're really obsessed with the apocalypse is really what it comes down to. So, my show is like a silly ensemble piece that's kind of like Parks and Rec, but it addresses sort of why we've always associated zombies with the apocalypse and why we're so desperate for it. And what are the signs of the apocalypse anyway? Especially because it'd probably take a lot slower than 28 days. And there's one other script that I should probably bring up. This was my first screenplay ever. It's called The Shtick Up. Very appropriate content for this podcast. And it's a heist movie about 3 young Jewish women who decide to rob a Swiss bank of like long lost Nazi gold. So there is about $4 billion worth of unaccounted for stolen Jewish property and money and art and everything the Nazis just took and funneled to Switzerland. It's still sitting there. So very early on, I wanted to, at least in a fictional sense, steal it back. Would love to steal it back for real. Maybe someday. Maybe that'll be my second act. But for right now, I just wanted to script these 3 friends who like are bad at heists, jumping in and trying to pull off an Ocean's 11 style heist on a bank. And of course, with that, I was able to parody so much. I was able to parody the way my family approaches Passover, because that's where the story starts, is at a Passover Seder. And I was also able to parody so much about Ocean's 11. And I watched truly every heist movie under the sun. So it's a genre parody.
I think there needs to be a convergence of zombies that attempt to do a heist.
I would love to write, direct, and star in that. I don't act. I would break that rule for that property.
Yeah. And I also wanted to talk to you about comedy as well, because you and I had met back in 2019 and you had done an episode on a different podcast that I used to have. And what I interviewed on it for most of the episode was being a woman in comedy. And back then it was this like whole thing. It felt like there weren't that many good women in comedy. And here we are 4 years later, and there are a bunch of good women I can think of, and ones that you really like, for example, Taylor Tomlinson and others. However, despite all of this, every time I go to some kind of open mic, comedy event, comedy show, because now I'm trying to do some comedy, which you've helped me a lot with, it is always me as the only woman there. In my comedy class that I took at the Comedy Cellar, it was me and 2 other women in an entirely male class, pretty much. What is that experience like, even today, now that you are looking at it 4 years later? It seems like things have changed. Some female comics are garnering a lot of attention. They're getting fame and they're reaching a male audience, but it still feels overwhelmingly male.
I would definitely say at the open mic level, it's male dominated for sure. And you have to be ready to be the only woman in the room. Like, I actually have some jokes about being the only woman in a lineup ready to go, because you're going to run into that situation. And there's nothing more satisfying than just sort of addressing it in the room and making fun of it. Like, my favorite thing to do is, I always try to book women on my shows, but sometimes they drop out or something like that, or it's just hard to arrange it. And so sometimes, I am the only woman at my shows. I sort of do this bit where I rage against the producers, and then I reveal that I am the producer, sort of how dare they? And then I'm I'm part of the problem. Also, I like the attention. So it's different when you're approaching it from a booking perspective. Has definitely been interesting, but I think I myself have had a pretty good couple of years, the past 2 years-ish in New York, performing as a woman. I feel like people have been very welcoming, and nobody has really treated me any differently, especially people who are under a certain age. New York is probably the friendliest stand-up community I've ever experienced, and that's including Chicago and LA. So I just feel like I'm seeing more and more lineups of all women, and it's not like a shtick. It's just, it happened to turn out that way, which is very cool.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Even with the little experience that I have, it genuinely feels like people are there. They want to laugh. And as long as you don't say something stupid, they will laugh. They want to laugh. They want to hear your jokes and laugh at them. And I was surprised by that, because I thought I'd get torn apart up there, especially when I did the open mic, the Grizzly Pair, where I was the only female. I realized it was actually totally to my advantage, because a lot of the comics that go to these things, they're there to watch other comics. They're there to work their material, see what kind of lands, work on their pacing. And because I was the only woman and I came in a magenta sweater, I stood out like a sore thumb. They all paid very close attention to my set and were very engaged. And that really helped me figure out what jokes were funny and which jokes needed to go.
That's great to hear. I'm really happy to hear that. I tend to dress very masculine on stage, or at least sort of more androgynous or more casual, because I do feel like when I've dressed preppier on stage, I get a little bit more pigeonholed by the audience faster. So I like mixing it up. But that's really great to hear that you were able to take it and grab it by the reins. And you're right. If you're wearing a magenta sweater, they're likely going to listen, even if they're just curious if you're bad. And then you can turn that around.
Yeah, exactly. And now you run a show, a Bomb Shelter comedy that you co-produce and you perform at as well. How many nights a week are you doing that? And what's it like?
Yeah, Bomb Shelter comedy has been amazing. Shout out to Jeff Cerulli and Matt Azark for bringing me on. They've been running the show for 6 years out of the Gaff. And so we run it once a week on Thursdays during the year round, and also on Saturdays during the summer at the Gaff East on the Upper East Side. So it's just been incredible to sort of be able to get that many reps in, especially because I'm doing other shows. So it comes out to, performing a lot more weekly than I used to. And yeah, it's just, there's nothing more valuable than having a space that is a good vibe. All of the comics we book, if you're an asshole, we're not bringing you back. So as a result, I think the show has really established a cred of being funny, and people work, they're passionate, and they actually put effort into their jokes. But also everybody's just going to be nice to each other, and they're going to be respectful. And you don't get that everywhere in comedy. So I'm really, really lucky that they brought me on as part of the team. They are not Jewish. I'm the only Jew. I'm not only female representation, I am Jewish representation. So one of them is married to a Jew, and I give him credit for that. I think we're going to win him over. I think it's going to happen.
That actually brings me to my next question, which is, sometimes you do shows for a Jewish audience. And this is a question I like to ask the other comics too. Do you think a Jewish audience is more tough to crack?
Jewish crowd, it depends entirely on the circumstance. So if you told me I was about to go up in front of an all Jewish crowd, if I knew that and we've had Jewish events come to Bomb Shelter and they're just make up most of the audience that night or something. If I know that I'm the only Jew in the roundup, yeah, I'm going to go hard on the Jewish jokes. I'm going to talk about my mom. I'm going to talk about my bubby. I'm going to talk about any jokes that I have that are Jewish related or Judaism related, because it's like a easy bonus points for establishing referential touch points that you all have. But if it's a all Jewish lineup as well, I'm going to listen really hard until it is my turn. Because if people are hitting the same jokes over and over, if everyone's doing bubby jokes, I actually will drop one joke about being Jewish up top and then detour really hard, because I think the audience gets really sick of, the same content over and over again. That's why it's kind of like you hear a comedian get up and start talking about dating apps and everybody groans. It's because it's all you hear. So I would say like it depends on what came before me. But if you told me like mixed Jewish, non-Jewish lineup, Jewish crowd, I would definitely go hard on using those common reference points. One of my favorite jokes to do with a Jewish audience, but also, for any audience, is I have this one story I like to tell about this time I was on stage and I did this comedy trivia show where every time you'd go up, you do a set, and then the host would come up and he'd ask the audience a trivia question about the set they just heard. And if you got the question right, you'd get a drink ticket. So he'd be like, okay, where's this comedian from? And you'd be like, Seattle. Or he'd be like, how would you describe this comic? And you'd be like, depressed. And you'd get your drink ticket. So this night, it was like all 22-year-olds in the audience. And they were like dying for these drink tickets. So he gets up, and I did like 10 minutes that night. And he did not remember a single thing about me. All he remembered is that at some point during my set, I mentioned that I was Jewish. So he gets up and he's like, here's your trivia question. What's Val's ethnicity? And there's a lull while the 22-year-olds are using all of their processing power. And then they all get it at once. This is a true story. They all get it at once. And there's just this like wave in the comedy club of like, she's Jewish, get her. I was like, what? They were screaming, they were climbing over each other. She's Jewish, she's a lesbian. Not an ethnicity, by the way, not an ethnicity. Just trying shit, I guess. And so I riff on that. I talk about that. It's a true story. And I talk about like, if you're outside the club, like what do you think's going on inside the club? And I'm not saying there were any anti-Semites there that night, but if there were, they probably had a great night. They got to like indulge some stuff. And so it's just like a silly story. Like I was not offended the night of. I thought it was kind of funny, but it's a fun story for other Jews to sort of be like, oh my God, like people are so weird when we tell people. So I've had weird reactions when I've told people I'm Jewish. Another joke I have as a girl, I was like, oh, I'm Jewish. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry. And I was like, why? And she was like, 'cause the Holocaust. So then I said, the what? And then I riff about that. That's also a true story. I mean, I didn't pretend I didn't know what the Holocaust was, but the first part of it is totally true. So I don't know. I think those stories are pretty like fun just because they're shocking, but they're also hopefully relatable for people in the audience if I've picked my audience correctly.
The most surprising thing about the trivia show is that this person referred to being Jewish as an ethnicity, which requires a level of knowledge about Jewish people, like greater than the surface, because usually people think that being Jewish is just a religion. But he made an astute observation that being Jewish is actually an ethnicity. And what's more shocking and more surprising is that the 22-year-olds were able to deduce that Jewish is an ethnicity.
Well, after an embarrassing amount of time, but yeah, eventually they got there. And no, you're not wrong. I should thank that host. I should send him a little message saying thank you for not remembering a single other thing about me. Maybe he was Googling, is Judaism a religion or ethnicity in the back the whole time, and that's why he didn't remember anything.
Yeah, and the other question I had for you is, and something I love about your set is it discusses dating, which is complemented interestingly by your upbringing, which is more observant. So it's a place where you don't really grow up learning about all these different experiences that you'll have through dating. And yet your set has these crazy stories about dating experiences you have and threesome apps and things I haven't even heard of. What do you think the response is of the people that you actually end up dating when you tell them you do comedy and that that's an angle that you take Is there even some kind of response? I've always wondered.
Yeah, I mean, I think been mixed reactions. I do have, when I've had dating profiles in the past, I have put, not with audio, but a clip of me doing stand-up in it. That is not to brag, that is to disclaim. Because if I saw a stand-up clip in someone's profile, I'm swiping left. They could be the most attractive person in the world, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to date a comedian. I'm really scared. I think you shouldn't date in your industry, first of all. So it's just a me thing. But also, I think that comedians on the whole are not the most dateable people. The lifestyle is pretty difficult. Date a comedian and find out. I don't want to dance around it, but it can be a tricky profession. It's not top of the list in terms of attractive professions. And any comedian you meet would probably agree with that, for sure. So there's definitely people who find their soulmates within the comedian community. And if I met mine, my rules would not stop me, for sure. However, I do think it's important before you go on a date with someone to sort of know what they're passionate about at the very least. And so I do have it on there. I get a lot of dudes telling me that they're going to give me a lot of material, which is a very interesting way of informing me that you are crazy. And I sort of am like, I'm playful about it. And then a lot of dudes are sort of like, when can I come see your stand-up? And then I sort of pivot, like I just parry back like, oh, that's a 10th base thing. Please, sir, do not look me up. What keeps happening, another thing that kept happening was dudes would sit down on a date with me, first date, and they would be like, I watched all your stand-up online, and I don't have my last name listed anywhere, so they did a lot of digging. And it's so crazy to me that like they think I'm going to be charmed by that, whereas if I sat down on a first date and I was like, I read your whole LinkedIn, they would be really freaked out. So it's been an interesting situation, to say the least.
I think it was you that told me you had some friend that would use Hinge to invite guys to go to her comedy shows. And that's such a smart idea if you're trying to get a crowd and you're not actually interested in dating those guys.
I mean, she was pretty shameless, and I can't blame her for that. I would never do it myself. But yeah, she got some butts in seats through the dating apps, and power to her.
I only learned about this recently, which I think you'll be surprised and be like, do you live under a rock, Margarita? But I didn't know what Bringers was. Bringers is this show where you essentially can do your set at a comedy club so long as you bring like 6 people with you into the audience, and they have to buy a ticket and get a 2-drink minimum. And you end up being able to do pretty good comedy clubs so long as you can bring these people and get them to pay. And because I was always like, how are these people performing at these clubs and getting videos at these clubs? And then I realized they were doing Bringers. And it's great marketing because they get their video up there with the logo of the comedy club in the background. They can put it in their comedy reel, but their set still sucks. It's just like, it's marketing.
Yeah, there's a lot of videos out there of people like bombing at very established comedy clubs. And also my friends will sometimes match with a guy and she'll be like, oh my God, look, he's performing at this comedy club. And I'll be like, okay, but you know what? If I'm on a dating profile, if I'm on a dating app and I see a video or a photo of him performing like in the back of a pickup truck to a not like if it's like a pop-up show somewhere weird, or if it's like a show on the beach or in a bar basement, I'm like, that guy does stand-up comedy. If you're at the Comedy Cellar, I'm like, there's a small chance this is a Bringer. Not the Comedy
Cellar. That's me at the Comedy Cellar.
No, you have a book show. Margarita has a book show, you guys. Get a video of you doing that.
Yeah, well, now everybody's asking me to release my set, and I realize that's dumb because that's the only set I have and the only jokes I have. I'm like, no, you got to go see it in person.
If you did well, you should release the set for sure.
We'll see.
It sounds like you did too.
Yeah, well, I sent it to Val, everyone, because Val helped me a lot and she has really good feedback. So that's that. Speaking of which, this brings me to my next question, which is around writing and inspiration. I think personally, you kind of have a leg up on this thing because you started out as a writer. So you're really good with words and coming up with things quickly and concisely, which is really effective for stand-up comedy. And you can listen to something and make it 3 times better because your brain is wired that way. Now, in addition to doing all this work in writing and stand-up, you also have a career. And it's really demanding to do all of these things. And stand-up is a really cognitively heavy exercise because your initial thoughts aren't usually what creates the joke, you have to sit there and really think about, well, what's funny about that? Or how can I compare it to something else? Or what does that remind me of? And you can spend hours working on one joke and never get it. How do you find the balance in your life? How do you find the time and the inspiration to get going? There are people listening to this podcast that want the bravery to go and try a stand-up class or to write a set, to do an open mic. Any advice that you would give to them or any thoughts that come to mind?
That's interesting. I definitely am encouraging of everybody to try it out, especially women, of course. I think everybody has 5 minutes at the very least in them, because you have 5 minutes of funny stories. You have 5 minutes of like hot takes. You can turn that into stand-up. Like where do I go for content? It's always going to be the thing that you want to talk about at parties. Like you're at a party, someone else brings up a subject, like maybe it's a TV show or it's a particular celebrity or it's some crazy camp story. Like whatever it is, if you're perk up at it and you're like excited to talk about it, it's going to make good stand-up. So that's my first piece of advice. For me, myself, it usually comes out of like chatting with my friends or journaling, or sometimes I will try to write like timely pieces, like little news stories, because those clips are really good to post online. But mostly, I have like 10 minutes on TV. I love watching TV, obviously. So I'm trying to do this new thing where I ask the audience what they're watching and then I roast their choice. That's a fun little exercise. Crowd work is a whole other animal, but I know a lot about TV and it's something I am passionate about and I can talk about forever. So I'm a little bit better situated to talk about that on stage once I'm actually up there.
Was there ever a time that you doubted yourself trying to pursue these passions in addition to your job?
A time when I doubted myself. I think you're always doubting yourself. I think coming back from the pandemic was really tricky because I took it off. I didn't do any shows at all. And I was starting over kind of in a new city. I moved back to New York February 2020, and it can be really intimidating. And you do a lot of stuff that you'd rather not do. You travel really far for shows, or you spend a lot of money getting to a show, or you're the one cleaning up the chairs at the end, which is still something I'm doing, which I am proud of. So I think jumping back into the game after the pandemic was sort of clearing up was really intimidating, but it was then that I sort of looked around and I realized like everybody left in New York at that point. Everybody was really passionate about stand-up. And so I made friends faster than I ever have in stand-up. And I was able to find opportunities that I never like dreamed of. And I was able to travel for stand-up. And I just started seeing it differently as more of like a community activity than anything else. So I would say that would probably be my answer.
Comedy during the pandemic was honestly insane. I remember there was a Zoom show improv show put together by UCB. It was a musical improv show.
Oh my God.
And there was no lag. There was no interruption. It was perfectly executed by all the little tiles on the screen. I was like, how? People don't know how to unmute themselves. These guys are they're running a whole musical improv show seamlessly on Zoom.
And I think that's super impressive. I would rather never do comedy again than do it over Zoom. I'm so sorry. I think I saw one video of a very established comedian, like a headliner doing stand-up, and he looked so depressed. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to pull this off. Though this one time I did do a hybrid show where I was in person, but there were also people watching via Zoom. And I was like, oh, that's funny. So I tried to do crowd work with them by like typing it in the chat. I was like, where are you from? And they were all on mute. They really did not want to be called out. And I was like, I don't love like chasing after audience members for crowd work, but like I'm going to do it to you because this is hilarious. So that was the one.
So funny. That's something that I think about a lot. Maybe you have a vantage point on it. The laughter makes a huge difference, and the attention is what brings the set together. It's what gives you the confidence to try your jokes and to put yourself out there and to really act and to get into character. How do comedians survive? Because their livelihood depends on somebody acknowledging them and being like, you're funny, don't worry, look, I laughed. I think it can be very hard over time because there's only really one metric by which you measure your success. And your jokes could be perfectly written and literary and beautiful and poetic. But if Joe Schmo does not get them, it doesn't matter what you do. And I think that can be really discouraging. And I think about this other thing a lot on my comedy rant is the top tier comics that I know say that comedy is not subjective. There's good comedy and then there's shit comedy. Do you agree?
I'm actually not so sure I agree with that. I think you're always going to get someone who doesn't like a joke for whatever reason, by good comedy and bad comedy. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I maybe would say like lazy comedy and not lazy comedy. Like for me, the biggest turnoff for a joke that doesn't make me laugh is if it's low-hanging fruit or it's a joke I saw on the internet 6 years ago. When people aren't as original, I think it can definitely come through very easily. But I also think that subject matter is just one of those things that some people are going to react differently to. And, when I was making a bunch of Jewish jokes that night with everybody, the audience mostly made of Jews, and I was rattling off jokes about my bubby or whatever, like the other people in the audience didn't have as good of a time. And that was me making a calculation, and I can't blame them for that. So I do think it is subjective. I do think it's totally based in your experience. But I also think that there's probably a reason that the less lazy, harder working comedians in writing their jokes and perfecting their stage presence, they're the ones who are more successful. So there's definitely a pattern.
Yeah. And those comics, I hear actually Russian comics say this a lot. And the interesting thing about Russian comedy is that stand-up didn't come to Russia until I would say like 2010 onward. Like it didn't become very mainstream. Somebody will probably correct me on that. But I feel like even only in 2018 did I start seeing Russian stand-up. So they didn't have this concept of writing your set and performing it many, many times and improving it. They were always doing new material, and that material got reinvented every single time. So they got really, really good because they were forced to come out with all this new stuff constantly, new material, new jokes. And they'll say that it's not that it's subjective what is bad, but it's objective what is good. Everyone knows good comedy when they see it. People can have differing opinions on what's bad, right? I might not find a joke funny and you will, but we will always both find incredible jokes funny, no matter what. So that's their stance on it, just to clarify. I thought it was an interesting thought. I felt like it had a little bit of truth in it because we do know those top tier comics. Even Louis C.K., who has done really problematic things, we can't deny that some of his stuff is just excellent.
Yeah, I think originality always comes through. Most people, even if it's the most depraved joke in the world and it's about something that I'm really sensitive about, most people can still trace the idea back to its source. They can still understand that it's a new idea or a fresh outlook or at the very least a creative one. So that's why I think I definitely agree with the idea that like good comedy is objective.
And now looking back on your trajectory and everything you've been able to achieve in your set and your work, is there anything that you would tell your younger self?
That's a good question. I think my younger self was way more rigid. I think she had like things she didn't do, like crowd work I never used to do because it was high risk, high reward. And I was just I'm such a control freak. I was like, I really need to, nail my jokes. And I choose every single word in my jokes so precisely that to me, it felt like betraying the audience to veer into uncharted territory. But now that I've really loosened up around crowd work, like I just want to do more of it. And I see how it can actually be the thing that keeps it fresh. Like that's the thing that keeps me coming back and gets me really excited because I have bits where I ask people for prompts like the TV one. Every single night, someone gives me a TV show that I haven't heard before. And I'm forced to, do the Russian comic thing you described where you have to come up with something on the spot, or maybe you crash and burn, but then you're on your way home and then the best joke in the world comes to you. And then now you have a joke for that situation. So it's really a trial by fire and it's masochistic and I love it.
And what do you want women doing comedy to know? Women who are just starting out, don't even pretend you're talking to me.
I feel like this advice wouldn't apply to you at all because you haven't been doing this, but there are certain wells that comedians return to for water, especially early comedians. I am so guilty of this. And this is advice for women and just in general. And so when I started out, I was very eager. I was a teen comic. I started at 13 at Gotham Comedy Club's teen showcase. So I wanted to go dark quick. I wanted to establish that I wasn't just this like teen comic who's going to talk about homework. I wanted to be like, here's the most depraved, most screwed up part of my brain. And I was talking about death on stage. Everyone was like, what's wrong with her? It was like, and by the way, none of it was funny. Like it didn't get funny for a very long time. Like it was just like truly the most public way that I could have acted out. I can't believe my parents were so supportive of it. Like I need to get them a bouquet of something. Like I need to get them an edible arrangement or something. But I understand the impulse to be like, I want to go for shock value. or I want to do common reference points like dating or sex. Like I see a lot of young female comedians being like, I'm just going to talk about sex on stage. And there's a reason it's a stereotype. In the same way, like dudes talking about how no one wants to date them is a stereotype for comics. And it's because there's a lot of that in the zeitgeist. A lot of comics get very famous and get very successful talking about that stuff. And it is a common reference point. Again, like this is all very fruitful ground. But I think like over relying on it and refusing to establish your voice outside of it, it's like if your comedy is just a reaction to what people would peg you as, if it's you trying to buck what they'd put on you, I'd argue it's not really your voice. It's just a reaction. So temper that instinct would be my advice.
Okay, so we need to discuss this. How did you know at 13 that you wanted to do stand-up? How did you find a class? Like, what did your parents say? Please provide more information on this.
I'm a middle child. I'm the third oldest of four. So I think my parents weren't super surprised that I like wanted more attention. And I was like 13 and I had been in a school production of Annie as Miss Hannigan because they typecast me as a sexually frustrated middle-aged woman very early. That was always something that I've gravitated towards. And then I had such a good time riffing up there. I was really flat. And I remember I had this one joke and they made me not do it. And I'm really upset. I mean, it makes sense. It was an Orthodox Jewish day school. It's starting to form a picture, right? But the joke is like, little girls everywhere I turn, I can see them. So it's little girls, little cheeks, little teeth, everything around me is little. So what I did is I looked down at my boobs. So little cheeks, little teeth, everything around me is look, little. And it's a flat chested joke. And I did it at one of the rehearsals and the teachers got so mad at me, but I had a great time. So I was like, you know what? I want to do comedic acting. I want to figure this out. So luckily I lived close enough to New York. I was in Stamford, Connecticut, that my parents found like a teen program for comedy acting. And I found stand-up through there and the rest is history.
Do you have any friends from those classes?
Oh my God, I run into people all the time. It's crazy. I'll be like at a party and it'll be someone's birthday party and someone will be like, were you part of the Gotham Comedy Club, like kids in comedy teen program? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, I remember you. And because I was the only woman, it makes sense that they might remember me. But I owe a lot to that program. And then I went to Chicago for school and I continued to produce shows and do stuff out there. And but I think like really hitting the pavement and doing shows weekly has been the most influential part of my comedy experience.
Ladies and gentlemen, even in the teenage stand-up comedy class, there are no women, is what I've learned today.
I'm not that surprised by that.
The other thing you made me think about is, this is such an important quality, you were like, I made this joke in my play and the Orthodox teachers got so mad at me. And so I knew I had to pursue comedic acting. If that happened to me and people got mad at me and didn't laugh at my flat-chested joke, I would be like, it's over. There's no future for me in this domain. And that's really important because I feel like that's what dissuades women from pursuing comedy in the first place.
Yeah. There was this element. It's so funny. I always knew that it was so silly, like to judge a 12-year-old for making an innocent joke. And, it's a self-deprecating one too. It's not like I'm calling out anybody else. Like, I was just like, why do you care? Like, don't you have better things to do with your time? And I think I always felt that way. So, like I said, while I so appreciate Jewish culture and a lot of my friends are Jewish and it's never not going to be a part of who I am. And, I'm going to raise my kids a certain amount of religious. I think I never want them to be forced to like choose a side, to rebel or to conform like that. I obviously chose rebelling. And I think it was a very healthy rebellion. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't, nothing crazy happened. But I definitely want my kids to be raised in a household where we encourage them to question absolutely everything.
And what are some projects that you're looking forward to that you can share with us?
Right now, I'm working on a new pilot that I'm really excited about. It's a send-up of cults, like the cult documentary. And I'm working on, like I said, some new crowd work stuff that I'm hoping to do, releasing new clips, trying to make that as much of a practice as possible because I'm so lazy and video editing takes forever, as I'm sure you're very well aware. Yeah, no, I'm just trying to sort of ride out 2024 and never stop writing.
Do you think you're seeing any kind of trends or differences in comedy?
In what sense? Like the style of comedy or the jokes or?
Yeah, because you're out there a lot and you see different comics do their set. Right now is a very interesting time. I feel like society is going through some kind of paradigm shift. I don't know how to explain it. It's never been the same since COVID, just even because of the events that are happening in the world. And I talked about this on another episode. Comedy is really popular right now for good reason, right? It's a tough time for everybody for many reasons, and comedy is a great medicine to that. Are there any trends that you're seeing right now in the comedy space, or topics or themes, comedians, emerging that you think are interesting?
Yeah, I think whenever you see sort of a comedian take center stage, like get really famous, you see sort of like facsimiles of them pop up at open mics around New York. And, maybe they're good at imitating, maybe they're bad at imitating, but you definitely see like glimmers. Like I remember I was doing open mics at, Louis C.K.'s peak, and there were so many comics who were just sort of not parroting, but you could tell where they were getting it from. They even dressed like him. Now I think we're seeing, there's a lot more comedians in the zeitgeist, but we're seeing a lot of like Joe Rogan impersonators a little bit is what I've been seeing a lot of. And moreover, we're seeing a lot of people who have either decided to stay entirely away from risque topics that might ruffle feathers. And we're seeing people who have decided that that's all they're going to talk about. So it's kind of like picking a side instead of picking and choosing and seeing, what nuances can I bring to a subject. It's more like, am I going to talk about it at all or not at all? So I feel like that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. Even though I feel like there are more women in comedy than ever, I think you're absolutely right that it's kind of turned, like mainstream comedy is a little bit of a boys' club for men. And I don't know what caused this dynamic. Like even Matt Rife, who had a predominantly female audience, was like, screw you guys, I'm going to be a boy's boy.
I think he would die if he heard you call him a boy's boy. I think that's pretty funny. I think that's exactly what he wanted to be. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really hard to do offensive comedy well. It's a rare skill. And honestly, one that I don't think I necessarily have. So it's not that I have chosen to entirely avoid offensive humor. It's more that I want to be really, really discerning if I'm going to go to risque topic, that I have a good point once I'm there. So yeah, I guess it is still kind of a boys' club, but I think the backlash against Matt Rife also speaks for itself. People don't really want to take that at face value anymore, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, I think the internet has really helped female audience members find people who represent them much faster.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. I just have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, what's the best way to keep up with you on social and learn about your shows?
You can follow me on Instagram and on TikTok. On TikTok, I'm at Val Bodurtha, Bodurtha. I know it's a bad name for comedy. That's why I'm keeping it. And on Instagram, it's Val Bodurtha NYC. You can also check out my website, valbodurtha.com, if you want to read my humor pieces and check out some of my videos. And come to Bomb Shelter Comedy next time you're in New York.
Thanks for sharing that. And the last question for you is, who would you like to nominate for the pot?
Yes, there is one. I know many Jews who are worth knowing, but one person I definitely want to nominate is my friend Yossi Amram, who is a psychologist, a CEO twice over, and just sort of like a bit of a pioneer in the leadership theory research field that I'm having trouble explaining, but he'll do a better job. And Yossi Amram, check him out.
Thanks so much for that nomination. And thank you again for doing this podcast.
I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People You Want to Know.